Talking about Physics of the Climate by Zachary Reynolds. So, greenhouse gases. What are they? Well, you have multiple. You have water vapor, nitrogen, CO2, methane. Pretty much everything in the atmosphere can be classified as a greenhouse gas because the atmosphere, well, acts as if sort of like a greenhouse. Location? Well, clearly they're in the atmosphere. So the function of a greenhouse gas. Why are they needed? Greenhouse gases allow our Earth to collect UV rays from the sun, and to be correct, they collect the specified amount that will allow us to live and function correctly. Too much and we burn, too little and we freeze. So we need them in order to maintain life on this planet in a balanced way. So which ones do humans produce? Well, humans produce CO2 and methane, primarily methane. Why do we produce them? Well, as you can see presented here, we produce them because, well, we want to make power. And a lot of times it's easier to burn something than it is to try to figure out some other way like wind or solar in order to make that energy. It's a lot easier for someone to throw a scoop of coal into the furnace and have it go up into the air and turn a turbine than it is for us to manufacture a way to make other sources of power. So ultimately we need them for power. CO2. Is CO2 bad? Well, the greenhouse gas effect would claim that yes, CO2 is going to eventually cause us to all burn and get so hot that we can't function on this earth. So the greenhouse gas effect states that when the sunlight comes into the atmosphere, the CO2 that we produce and all the other greenhouse gases, but this particular theory is based primarily on the CO2 that humans produce, begins to thicken as we produce more and reflect the sun rays and keep down back to the earth and keep them trapped so that the earth continues to warm more and more and more. So the predicted numbers for the theory are that over a 10-year period, the CO2 has increased by 35%. While that is true, yes, 100% true statement, okay? Also, there's the claim that from 1990, the parts per million of CO2 was at 354. Now, that being an accurate number, the predicted amount for 2050 is 516 parts per million. That being said, if this is correct, the degrees in Celsius that are going to increase on this earth is about 2 degrees in the atmosphere. Now, you might say that that is pretty minute. Well, looking at calculations, 2 degrees Celsius actually affects our earth quite a bit when it comes to the atmosphere. It can cause detrimental heat waves and cause us to really not be able to function as humans on this planet. Excuse me. So the truth. Well, the actual role of CO2 in the atmosphere, if anything, science shows that it's going to cool the atmosphere because those CO2 molecules are trapping heat and then they're actually leapfrogging that heat up higher and higher and higher until they escape into space. So greenhouse gas theory is completely irrelevant when looked at through actual science and not just a few years of study. That can also be seen in the illustration presented here. What is the actual cause of our Earth warming? Well, one of the main factors of greenhouse gases that will cause our Earth to warm is water vapor. If water vapor increases so much that it starts to trap heat, it doesn't have to increase by even a fraction to start doing this. And that will ultimately cause detrimental warmth to this planet. Whereas CO2 doesn't really affect the rising or lowering of the temperature. The true cause that really is going through people's minds, that they don't even realize it, is cycles. The Earth has temperature cycles. As presented in this diagram, during the Roman period, which was way before 500 AD, we see how the Earth's temperature cools and then rises for the medieval period, cools again during the 1600s, and then rose and rose and rose, and will continue to rise till around 2050 or so. Then we're going to see in the future it start to decline again. So currently it's warming, and it's going to warm for the next 30 to 40 years based on the science. However, after that period, once it reaches a peak, the Earth has it in place to where it's going to cool itself down, because that is how the Earth functions. Now, how is heat circulated throughout our Earth? Because this plays a major role in why our Earth is able to cool and heat itself. Now, the wind and the sea, they carry heat across the globe. So, for example, if this wasn't in effect, at nighttime, when the sun is on the opposite side of the Earth, everything would freeze and become frozen as solid as you can imagine, until the sun came back and the slow thawing process would then begin again. Now, the sea does the same thing as the wind. The wind will carry the heat faster across the plains, across the oceans even. But the sea and the water will trap that heat and transfer it to other portions of the Earth in a slower manner, which will allow it to be then picked up by the wind again and redistributed more quickly. So why is the Earth smarter than us humans? Well, here is the Atlantic thermal line circulation map, and this kind of gives you an idea of how the heat and cool are all circulated over the globe, and why the Earth knows what it's doing. Well, another reason, as presented in the paper that was written, is the ocean actually, based on its temperature, we can tell how much CO2 it is absorbing. And while doing this, it's able to help the Earth get rid of that excess CO2 that we think is so bad, but it actually has this in place in order to regulate it and make sure that we're not overusing and overproducing. So, at the end of the day, CO2 is not going to be what warms this Earth until we can no longer survive. The reason it's getting hotter and people thought that it was CO2 is because we're on cycles. And much like any other cycle, it goes up and down and up and down. And people were looking at it in such a fractionized area that they didn't realize that 1,000 years ago or so, it was also that hot. And it had gotten cool in between. So, moral of the story, make sure you look at large periods of time and make sure that you know what molecules do. These are the sites that I used. Thank you and have a wonderful day.